which is loosely related to vulnerability issues in the ocean space. Today, we're fortunate to have Emmanuel Neokye from the Canadian Centre for Climate Change and Adaptation at the University of PEI. He's recently published two really interesting papers. One is Climate Change Impacts on Oyster Aquaculture, which is part one. It's called Identification of Key Factors. And then the second paper is Climate Change Impacts on Oyster Aquaculture, part two, which is Impact Assessment and Adaptation Measures. So he'll be presenting those today. And just if you're not familiar with the process here, we generally record the presentation part and we post it on our YouTube channel. But the Q&As, question and answers are not so nobody's going to be put on the spot and recorded, and then everyone can feel free to have an open discussion there. So that's all I have to say. Welcome very much. And Emmanuel, if you want to take it away, go for it. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Gregory, for this great opportunity to present my work here. And thanks to your viewers as well. As Gregory mentioned earlier on, my name is Emmanuel Neokye, and I'm a PhD candidate of UPEI. Precisely, I have the climate lab, and my professor is Professor Zander. Yeah, so I'm happy to share my work with you, and I hope you're going to enjoy it. Yeah, so first of all, I'll start by the life cycle of oyster species. Before we can understand the culture and everything about oyster, we need to know how its life begins. So basically, in PI, for instance, in the nursery, they do artificial fertilization of both the male oyster and the female oyster to produce the fertilized eggs, and within 2 days, they transform to the trophical stage, and within 20 days, then it becomes the villager stage onto up to 6 months, when it becomes the spat. So the spat is what is usually either transported to the farms, and it's cultured between 2 to 3 years, and we get it is harvested. So basically, that's the life cycle of oysters. All right, so in a typical oyster farm, this is a picture I took during one of my field visits. So in PI, for instance, oysters are cultured either using the off-bottom approach, as in your picture on your left down corner, and or the or submerged form. So normally they either submerge the cage, or the cage is off bottom. And yeah, so typically you see that on your top left hand corner is the cage, how they put all the spat in them, and they seal the cage, and then they transport it to the site, that's the farm, for it to be cultured. And the amazing thing is that they once you are culturing oysters, you leave it, and you don't need to feed them. So one thing most of the farmers know is that they make sure that they put the oysters in a place where the primary productivity is very high, so that the oysters can grow faster and get a higher market size. Yeah. All right, so this is on your screen is the global oyster production and key production countries. And yeah, so China, of course, is one of the production countries in terms of oysters. Yeah, very much advanced in aquaculture. And of course, US and Canada. And for Canada, Canada is also one of the leading producers. And when we come to our in terms of provincial, British Columbia is the number one, and PEI is the second in terms of production. So that's why probably my professor wanted us to do much about oyster aquaculture. You know. All right. So oyster in the ecosystem plays a major role. And one major role is it serves as bioengineering in the marine ecosystem. For instance, if you introduce oysters in a water body which is very turbid, because of their filtration ability, they are able to clean up the water for you. And yeah, it is very important for them. And of course, oysters also produce help us, in terms of biodiversity, and is very crucial in the aquatic ecosystem. And last but not least, they also provide food and livelihood. Countries in the third world, some of them depend on oysters for food, and is very essential for the human system. So back to the main issue. I introduced this slide to, uh, I mean, I mean, help us know, refresh our minds on climate change, and it refers to a long-term shift in temperature and weather patterns, such as shift. This shift can be natural due to changes in the sun's activity or anthropogenic activities. The main greenhouse gases causing climate change are, I mean, carbon dioxide and methane. So yeah, so the warming of the earth is a contributing factor, and we all play parts in that. So there are various ways through which climate change can affect aquaculture. One factor is the increasing concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. This causes direct climate change, causing changes in climatic conditions such as increasing air temperature, the rising sea level, more frequent, climate extreme storms, and this impact, changes in salinity and causes infrastructure damage. And notwithstanding, and in the course of cultivating oyster, invariably the farmers also releases CO2 into the atmosphere through, the use of their vessels, motorboats. I mean, you know, and get all these activities, the use of transportation, all these activities invariably also contribute to, CO2 into the atmosphere. So, yeah. So on this slide, it talks about the emissions of CO2 and other factors affecting oyster aquaculture. How is all this, gases, what are the contributing effects? So basically, in a typical oyster farm, the absorption of nitrous and CO2 from the atmosphere, happens, and it furthermore, transmission of visible light, ultraviolet rays, infrared light also are all contributing factors. So all this are absorbed into the water body, and in some countries, industrial waste are being also released, and fertilizers from nearby farms are being released into estuaries, and the estuaries and the bays, these are the places where oyster um, are being cultivated. And all these activities result in increased water temperature. It causes eutrophication, harmful algal blooms, and in the oyster farms. And this in turn causes water acidification, depletion of dissolved oxygen. And in some cases, it leads to hypoxia in oysters, meaning some of the oysters, they die out of lack of oxygen. So these are some of the effect of greenhouse gases on oyster production. All right. So on this slide, I'm talking about the factors affecting oyster production, and I categorize them into environmental factors and other factors. So one major factor, is the global greenhouse gas emissions and increasing water temperature, salinity, algal bloom, and sea level rise, changes in rainfall patterns, and ice surface layer formation. So these environmental factors are affecting production. So on the other hand, some of the other factors affecting production is sedimentation and siltation, dissolved oxygen content, pathogens and disease, primary productivity, and turbidity. So all these factors invariably affect the production of oysters. All right, so I want to take, one of them and talk about it. And one is the ocean acidification. So the ocean acidification is coming about because of a lot of absorption of CO2 from the atmosphere, and this CO2 react with the water body and give out carbonate ion, and releases a lot of hydrogen ions. So there are a lot of, the the more the hydrogen ions in the water body, the more the water become acidic. And what are the impact on oysters? Extreme pH disrupt feeding rate, nutrient absorption, and energy. High water acidity impairs gamete production and viability. So high pH also affects the mobility of gametes. And oysters in their early stages, because of the trochophore, they are able to move. But when the water body is very acidic, they become immobile, and they resort to not moving at all. Yeah. So on this slide, it talks about rising water temperature. This is on your screen is a graph I generated from using the NOAA platform, and it suggests that the water temperature is, gradually increasing, across the globe, and it has implications on oysters. So what are the implications? It's affect shell formation when during the early stage of oysters, and if they are exposed to high temperature, it affects their shell formation. And extreme temperature also causes mortalities in adult oysters and make them more susceptible to diseases. High temperature also lowers the reproduction rate in both males and females, leading to poor egg quality and decreased mating. All right. So another effect is the harmful algal bloom. High levels of harmful algal bloom causes low dissolved oxygen, leading to respiratory issues and mortalities. So the impact in the ecosystem is that um, in, injection of toxins such as salsitosins and demoic acid leads to health issues and impaired physical function. When oysters ingest these harmful algal blooms, it makes them um, they are able to even transfer this infections onto us as humans and through the food chain. Yeah. And also harmful algal blooms causes increase in predation and food competition. Yeah. In the oyster farms. Yeah, so even in some cases, this harmful algal blooms form bioluminescence, where in the evening you go, and it gives a good scene, but it's very harmful. And yeah. All right. So another factor affecting oyster production is sea level rise, and sea level rise causes submerged areas due to undulating low-lying areas, especially estuaries and intertidal zones, bays, and reduces substrate for attachment. Inflow of seawater into the estuaries and bays causes high salinity, which is detrimental to the survival and growth of oyster larvae or spad. It also leads to influx of species in estuaries and shift in habitats. So yeah, this is a graph I also generated using mean surface um, sea level from 1993 to 2023. Yeah, and it shows that globally the sea level is rising by 3.59 millimeters per year. All right. So another factor affecting oyster production is precipitation. In other words, rainfall. So what are the impact on oysters? This result in low salinity, which makes oysters vulnerable to stress and reduce reproduction capabilities. Sediment from rainfall, runoff, clog the gills and impede the feeding mechanisms, which also buries oysters. And then heavy metals carried by runoff waters in estuarine environment can accumulate in their tissue and trigger health issues. So these are some of the implications of, changes in precipitation on oyster production. All right. And another factor is salinity. High salinity causes osmosis stress, leading to, mortality of larvae. And high salinity also affect the osmoregulation and the physiology of oyster species. And of course, low salinity level also causes fluctuations and decreased growth weight because this um, oysters need a specific optimum, salinity range to, fully function. So when the salinity is very low, um, their growth rate becomes an issue. And if you are an oyster farmer, and growth and the market size is very crucial. For you to be able to recoup your investment, you've done. All right. So another crucial factor affecting oyster production is sedimentation and siltation. So on your screen is a picture before and after Fiona, and you could see that there's a lot of erosion, even especially in PAI, and erosion results in sedimentation and turbidity. All right, so as in oyster aquaculture, this has implications, and sediment from floods and storms causes high turbidity, like I mentioned, and it lowers the quality of the habitat. Sediment accumulate Sediment accumulation has the potential to bury some oyster cages and create dangerous hypoxic condition and catastrophic oyster mortality. So yeah, when the sediment is too much for the estuary or the bay, these are the consequences. All right. Another interesting factor is ice layer formation. Um, this is a picture. A picture on your screen is I especially chose PEI because that's specifically where my study will be concentrated. And in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, a lot of ice layer formation during winter affect production. How it affects in so many ways because I was talking to the farmers and during harvest time, they need to get these machines to break through the ice, which causes increase the cost of production. Yeah. So yeah, and another factor is that it also inhibit the rate of photosynthesis and dissolve oxygen during winter season, and it also impede the respiration of aquatic organisms. And yeah, as like I mentioned, it also hinders the filter feeding ability because most of the time in extreme winter conditions, these organisms they go into hibernation. And of course, if an animal is or organism is in hibernation, you don't expect it to grow to the full market size. And yeah, like I also mentioned, it also increased the cost of production, especially using machines to cut through the ice to harvest the fish, yeah, harvest the oysters. Sorry, and yeah. All right. So another important factor affecting oyster production is extreme weather conditions such as storms, and in our case is like in Fiona in 2022. We were struck by Fiona, and in your picture is some of the cages and floats that were destroyed by Fiona, and this cost a lot of millions to the farmers. And yeah, like I mentioned, it leads to loss of infrastructure, cages and floats. Loss of aquaculture sites and low production output. And like I also mentioned earlier on, it has caused a lot of loss to farmers. And in a recent interview, I read from CBC that 1 year, 1.5 years now, most of the farmers have not been paid their insurance concerning, the loss of their infrastructure. So, the climate impact on oyster production is evident even in our daily lives, as, shown in your picture. All right. So, how do we do assessment of and we can do that by using the exposure approach. And then with the exposure approach, you use the environmental conditions. For instance, we can use water surface temperature, regular monitoring of the water surface temperature of a particular site or location. Okay, we can also monitor the ocean acidification level of a particular site or location. And of course, we need to also check the primary productivity of the in a particular site or location. How do we do that? We check for the chlorophyll A level. So chlorophyll A level is an indicator of primary productivity, and we can also do assessment of weather, extreme weather conditions, and these are all factors you consider when you want to do climate vulnerability assessment. Yeah. All right. So I introduced this slide because of, in in the month of June, we recorded an oyster disease known as the MSX, the multiculated sphere unknown. So these are some of the diseases that our oysters are prone to. We have the Denman Island disease, and the causative agent is Macrocystis mckinney. So it's a protozoan, and it has no syndrome. And how do we, what are the preventive measures? Restricted modified culture practices, Yeah, but my focus is on the multiculated sphere unknown, which is caused by the Hapliosporidium nelsoni. That's the causative agent, and the parasite is a protozoan parasite, and their main function is that they inhibit growth and mortalities. So yeah, and the preventive measure is to the farmers need to practice a control culture, which means you don't need to transport a particular oyster from maybe site A to site B. Everything needs to be controlled. So these are some of the diseases that is capable of affecting oyster species. And like I mentioned, so if you, go to a particular farm and you want to identify the multiculated sphere, that's MSX, on your screen, especially on your left, that's a sign you see the dark spots. And these are very harmful. So what are the implications? This causes infection to fish species and humans, through the food chain. Yeah. So, this also causes mortalities, affect shellfish skeleton formation, accounts for low fishery production. So it doesn't only affect oysters, it also affects fish as well. Yeah. All right. So what are some of the mitigation and adaptation measures for oyster aquaculture? We need to do we need to do fouling control. That's is, regular checking of oyster cages to see whether they are um, um, fouling on them, and you clean the cages and then you put it back. You also need to do water quality monitoring. Most importantly, we need to select genetically viable seeds. I mean, seeds that are able to withstand, extreme and harsh weather conditions. Yeah. And some of the adaptation measures is that, we need to produce resilient infrastructure such as cages and floats, cages that are be able to stand, storms and hurricanes. Yeah. And of course, we also need to practice sustainable transportation and distribution using, for instance, electric and yeah, I visited a farm in PI, and one of the farmer was using electric boats, and which is very recommendable. I don't know about other, parts of the world, and also need to use, green technologies such as solar powered boats and reduce emissions. Yeah, and we need to also have in place of innovation and technology instead of in terms of, for instance, if a storm is coming, the farmers are able to get alert that maybe this is the higher the level of the storm, so that they really prepare so that they don't lose everything. Yeah. So in summary, oyster aquaculture is affected by a lot of factors, and one of the factors is, climate-induced hazards and greenhouse gas emissions, increasing water temperature, as we spoke about before, and changes in precipitation, pathogens, and disease, sedimentation. So, in conclusion, climate change is causing an increase in acidification and water temperature, adversely affecting oyster production, and climate-induced factors such as storms in recent years have greatly affected oyster production. Like example I mentioned earlier on concerning our own island PI, where I mean about 70 million Canadian dollars was lost in oyster farms. Yeah, this was reported by the president for Alliance Aquaculture in PI, and it's evident amongst us. And yeah. All right. So thank you all for giving me your audience, and I really appreciate sharing my work with you. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. If there's any question, I'm ready to answer. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Manuel.